Right now, Putin's disgrace in Baku. Azerbaijan has completely shattered the Kremlin's plans. Trump humiliated Putin, and now Russia is being torn apart. A massive drone bombed Tatarstan. The whole truth about the failure of Putin's new weapons tests. A catastrophe has occurred in Russia. A secret meeting between Lavrov and Rubio. Shocking details have surfaced. Ukrainian partisans from ATESH struck the occupiers in Crimea. Russia will not recover from this blow. The Russians are in a panic. The US is once again supplying Ukraine with missiles. The Kremlin is outraged. Trump is on fire. Putin won't be able to talk his way out of this. Missiles are on the way. HIMARS are loaded. Who's laughing now? Urgent. Ukraine isn't enough for Putin. The bunker dweller is preparing a Balkan bloodbath. All this and more coming up in our episode of Hotspot. The ice has broken. Trump has turned against Putin. Even more weapons for Ukraine. Crucial decisions have already been made. This will change the course of the war. The bloody dictator is raging. Trump is preparing a powerful surprise for Vladimir Vladimirovich. The US is putting the squeeze on Russia. The shockwave will hit all fans of Russian oil and more. The Russian economy is on the brink. American missiles aimed at Moscow and Beijing. Shocking details of a secret conversation. The ball is in the US's court. Who will win this geopolitical match? Stay tuned.
Putin is constantly throwing all sorts of nonsense at us. If you want the truth, he was always very polite. But as it turns out, that means nothing.
It seems the ice has started to break. For the first time since returning to the White House, Donald Trump has begun taking steps that could truly change the course of the war in Ukraine. These steps are in Kyiv's favor.
We are not happy with Putin. I am not happy with Putin. I can tell you this quite frankly right now, because he's killing a lot of people and many of them are his own soldiers, mostly his soldiers and their soldiers. Right now, the death toll is already up to 7,000 a week. I am not happy with Putin. Are there any other questions?
Yes, sir. You just said that you are not happy with Vladimir Putin. Do you plan to take any action?
Don't we really want to arrange a little surprise for them?
At the same time, the White House is considering options for aid to Ukraine. The top priority is protecting Ukrainian airspace. Among other things, according to the Wall Street Journal, Trump is considering providing Ukraine with an additional Patriot air defense system. This could become the first major arms delivery not tied to a decision by the Biden administration, and at the same time, a signal that the US is coming back.
We are going to send more weapons. They must be able to defend themselves. Right now, they are under very serious attack, so we will have to send more weapons. Yes, mostly of a defensive nature.
We have found ourselves in a certain spiral, and it is very important that it works for us, not against us. And in the situation where Ukraine is now working diplomatically with the United States, it is very difficult to determine whether this is in some sense a plus, in what sense it is a neutral pace, or in what sense it might even be harmful.
As we remember, Ukraine received the blow to the gut from the US in the first days of July. Across the ocean, they partially suspended the supply of weapons to Kyiv, from Patriot interceptor missiles to ammunition for F-16s. At that time, Trump claimed that Biden had supposedly depleted the country. It later turned out that the decision to freeze supplies was a surprise even to his own circle. According to CNN, Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth did not inform either Trump himself or his advisors about this. Special Representative for Ukraine Kellogg, Secretary of State, and National Security Advisor Marco Rubio learned about the suspension of supplies from the news. The 47th president himself publicly stated that he is not responsible for this decision. But that's not all. The aggressor country may be facing a devastating blow. Republican Senator Lindsey Graham has initiated a new package of sanctions against Russia. Specifically, the document provides for a 500% tariff on imports from countries that continue to purchase Russian oil and raw materials.
I'm considering it. Yes, I'm considering it. The Senate has adopted and continues to adopt very tough sanctions. But yes, I'm considering it.
If we simply forecast the situation and Graham's bill is passed, what will that mean? Where will Russia get its money? What will be cut back? I would predict that first and foremost, any expenses not related to the country's military-industrial complex will continue to be slashed. Again, things like healthcare, education, and pension spending. At the same time, they will try to maintain spending on the military-industrial complex. Their cuts will have to be made as well, perhaps not as significantly as one might wish, but cuts will be necessary. And the only thing I would suggest is that, for example, instead of the current $150 billion, if, say, this revenue drops by at least a quarter, it means that they will try to make up 2/3 of it at the expense of the social sector. There will be a massive global decline there, but 1/3 will still have to be shifted to the sector related to the military-industrial complex. And that is at least a loss of about 15% out of those 150 billion.
At the same time, a scandalous audio recording from 2024 surfaced, published by CNN. In it, Trump tells donors how he threatened Putin and Xi Jinping with direct threats of bombings in the event of attacks on Ukraine and Taiwan.
I told Putin, if you go into Ukraine, I will bomb Moscow to hell. I'm telling you, I won't have a choice. And he was like, I don't believe you. Not a chance, he said. And I told him, oh, I will. He said again, I don't believe you. But the truth is, he did believe me. Well, about 10%. I told you he believed me about 10%. Then I met with Xi from China and told him the same thing. If you attack Taiwan, I will bomb Beijing to hell. He thought I was crazy. He asked, Beijing? I replied, I have no choice, I'll have to bomb you. We'll bomb Beijing. He didn't believe it either, but he still believed it about 10%. And 10% is still something. And 10% is all you need. Honestly, even 5% would be enough.
Is this just part of political maneuvering, or is it a serious turning point? For now, we can only hope that the US has truly come to its senses and is not going to back down in the fight for justice. But only time will reveal the real answer. Meanwhile, the fate of Ukraine and the security of the entire continent hang in the balance, where every next move by Washington carries enormous weight. A hellish fire show in Crimea. The Ukrainian partisans of ATESH have gone all in. The occupiers are in a panic. American super missiles are obliterating the Russians. HIMARS is causing a stir in the Kremlin. The Pentagon is secretly supplying weapons to Ukraine. We are for peace, the cynicism of the year from Peskov after a hellish night in Ukraine's capital. More about Russia's hell to flow.
Glory to Ukraine! The partisan movement ATESH continues to destroy Russian logistics in temporarily occupied Crimea. This time, a relay cabinet was destroyed on a crucial section of the railway passing over the Kerch Bridge. This stretch of track is strategic for the occupying forces, as equipment, fuel, and personnel are regularly transported through it. The strike on this logistical lifeline delayed important deliveries of military cargo. And according to ATESH, there will be more and more such strikes. Meanwhile, the commander-in-chief of the Ukrainian Armed Forces, Oleksandr Syrsky, emphasized the restoration of positions and the holding of territories in the Kursk and Belgorod regions to tie down the enemy at the border with Ukraine.
The actions of Ukraine's defense forces in the Kursk and Belgorod regions are tying down the operational reserves of the occupying army, preventing the general staff of the occupiers' army from redeploying operational reserves directly to the territory of Sumy, and accordingly Kharkiv regions to expand their zone of presence and create the so-called buffer zone. And this has not only military but also accordingly political and informational consequences for the occupying country.
At the moment, the Russian army is unable to carry out the political decision of its military leadership, namely the creation of buffer zones in the territory of Sumy and Kharkiv regions.
And accordingly, the active nature of hostilities in the territory of Kursk and Belgorod regions makes it possible to divert a significant reserve of occupying troops from accomplishing this task.
Without having liberated their own territories, the occupiers are intruding into others. Mostly, though, it's just informational. They claim they've already captured everything and defeated everyone. For example, that's what they're doing now with the Dnipropetrovsk region.
There is no objective control data indicating any tactical successes by the occupiers in terms of capturing territories in the Dnipropetrovsk region. At the same time, the occupiers are trying to intensify pressure on the positions of Ukraine's defense forces in several directions at once, precisely with the aim of reaching the administrative borders of the Dnipropetrovsk region. First and foremost, this concerns the Novopolotsk and Pokrovsk directions.
Meanwhile, in Kyiv, the Security Service of Ukraine, SBU, detained Chinese spies who were gathering secret technologies for the production of Ukrainian missiles. A father and son, citizens of the People's Republic of China, tried to illegally export to China secret documentation on the Ukrainian missile system RK-360 megacoulombs Neptune, which sent the famous cruiser Moskva to the bottom. The detainees suspected of espionage face up to 15 years in prison with confiscation of property. The army of the aggressor state, Russia, is increasing the number of UAVs it uses during massive attacks on Ukraine. And among these drones, there are decoy imitators.
First and foremost, we're talking about German drones. Their main task is to drain the resources of Ukraine's air defense systems. For context, out of the 750 air ballistic munitions that were launched during the most massive recent attack on Kyiv, about 400 were German drones. In other words, this creates what is called a wave-like pattern of attack. This is the actual experience of the Ukrainian side, the so-called swarm attack.
The Ukrainian Air Force has already learned to effectively distinguish between real drones and deceptive decoys, relying on precise radar flight parameters as well as clear visual and acoustic characteristics.
A massive drone bombed Tatarstan. A terrifying drone crashed into a residential building. Shocking footage. Did Putin's new weapon self-destruct? Drone developers are in shock. What went wrong? Terrifying details of the drone crash in Russia coming up next.
The reason for the crash of the latest Russian drone, Altus, also known as Altair in Tatarstan, was electronic warfare. At least that's the version being put forward by the Ural Civil Aviation Plant, which is refining this unparalleled project. In the morning, Russians already on edge from Ukrainian drones began to notice a white plane flying overhead. Most likely, it was a Cessna aircraft conducting visual monitoring. A little later, the heavy drone itself took off. But almost immediately, it landed on a house in a garden cooperative.
Is very, very incredibly fast, that is for sure.
At this time around 5 in the morning, they say a white plane flew by. And after that, 2 more came, probably around 8:30. One of them ended up right here. All the parts, everything is labeled in Russian, but we can't say for sure if it's ours or not. People already came and tried to put out the fire themselves, with their own efforts. There was an old man living in this house, but he wasn't here that day. He was lucky.
And is it big?
Yes, there's a very significant and noticeable gap, about 5 meters, I truly think.
The Dubki Dacha cooperative, where the incident happened, is not just outside Kazan, but right on the glide path. This is the descent trajectory of an aircraft as it approaches the runway of the Kazan aviation plant, named after Gorbunov. It is here that the Tuesday 160 and Tuesday 22M are assembled and modernized. In addition, tests of the strike drone were conducted just a kilometer from the military airfield in Borisoglepsk, where the Russians relocated their strategic aviation after the web of attacks. In a comment to the Russian publication Business Online, the Ural Civil Aviation Plant, located in Yekaterinburg, and I remind you, involved in the Altus project, gave its own version of what happened.
Today, the Altus unmanned aerial vehicle created by the enterprise did indeed conduct a test flight, and the takeoff from the base airfield proceeded as normal. Later, during the flight, satellite navigation was disrupted by unidentified external electronic warfare means. The drone continued its flight using its inertial navigation system. For landing, it was necessary to send the aircraft for a second approach. The landing was carried out in inertial mode. An abnormal situation occurred.
The incident in Tatarstan showed that Russia has not abandoned its long-term project, the creation of a reconnaissance strike drone analogous to the Global Hawk. Moscow began the project for a heavy UAV with long endurance in 2011. At that time, the Sokol Design Bureau won a 1 billion ruble contract from the Ministry of Defense. 2 years later, the designers presented the first model of the drone, and another 2 years after that, in 2015, it briefly took off from the ground for the first time. The delivery of 2 systems was postponed to 2018, but this never happened. Instead, the general director of the Sokol Design Bureau, Alexander Gomzin, was sent to a pre-trial detention center. He was accused of fraud and misappropriation of budget funds. That same year, the Altair project was transferred to the Kazan branch of the Ural Civil Aviation Plant. How the UAV was finalized there is unknown. But a year later, the Ministry of Defense triumphantly reported a flight lasting 32 minutes at an altitude of up to 800 meters in fully automatic mode. And so, at the end of 2021, the agency announced the successful completion of the tests.
The extensive tests of the long-range unmanned aerial vehicle, the LTSRU, have been successfully completed.
Moreover, propagandists rejoiced that this unparalleled development had received its own Russian engine to replace the German one, the supply of which had stopped due to sanctions. The Klimov Design Bureau developed its own VK 800-volt engine, which was suitable not only for the LTS, but also for an entire line of light Russian helicopters that suffered from the same problem as the drone. With the same takeoff power of 800 horsepower as the German engine, our design turned out to be dry, meaning it was simpler and more reliable in terms of oil lubrication. It also became even more technologically advanced thanks to the use of hot isostatic pressing. So the last weak point of our Altius was eliminated. At that time, the designers committed to delivering 18 Russified Altius drones to the Russian Ministry of Defense by the end of 2022. Later, they were expecting another 50 there, but so far, as it seems, only the residents of Tatarstan have seen them in action. By the way, according to journalists from the publication Business Online on the 30th of June, a court in Russia sentenced Alexander Gomzin, the creator of the first heavy drone model, to 8 years in a penal colony. However, due to the statute of limitations, he will not spend a single day behind bars. And there's another interesting fact in this story. The Simonov Design Bureau, which he headed and which was also declared bankrupt at the beginning of last month, will resume its operations.
Every voice matters. Join our community, support independent journalism and help us bring you the truth from Ukraine. Become a member of Ukraine today. Join us now.
A disgrace for Putin, Aliyev put the dictator in his place. The Kremlin envoy's visit to Baku has failed. Azerbaijan is no longer staying silent. Putin is in shock. Aliyev refused to play by the Kremlin's rules. Order from above, urgently go after Trump for criticizing the bunker dweller. Secret meeting. Where and why did Lavrov and Rubio meet? Watch the hot details coming up next.
The conflict between Azerbaijan and Russia continues. Aliyev refused to meet with Putin's personal envoy, and the envoy returned to Moscow empty-handed. At the same time, Russia demonstratively deported the head of the Azerbaijani diaspora, Elshan Ibragimov.
We consider ourselves Russians, but we must not forget that we are Azerbaijanis.
Such audacity from the Azerbaijani president literally stunned the propagandists, and as usual, they immediately started threatening with money and war.
With all due respect to Azerbaijan, its history and traditions, if Russia so much as raises an eyebrow for a second, well, we are Azerbaijan's third largest trading partner.
4 years.
And I want to remind you of the amount of money that is transferred from Russia to Azerbaijan, not from Azerbaijan to Russia. And then apparently the situation could change dramatically. That is exactly what they're counting on, or considering the 300 kilometers of border and seeing what they allow themselves, and watching how on central television everyone is allowed to say anything. Do you want to go to war? I am sure that not a single person in their right mind and sober memory living in Azerbaijan would ever go that far.
In addition, according to intelligence reports, the Russians are increasing the number of troops at the base in Armenia. The Armenian authorities immediately denied this information. On the contrary, they say they would actually like to reduce the Russian military presence.
This situation arose due to the assessment of Armenia's security needs, and I do not want to undermine any factors related to this. But our task is to resolve relations in the region in such a way that we do not depend on any external support. Of course, this will not be easy.
This is saber-rattling. Obviously, Russia today is not ready to fight on two fronts. And the idea of an invasion of Azerbaijan now seems completely unrealistic, especially considering that Baku is supported by Ankara. This is nothing more than Russia's unwillingness to recognize the new geopolitical realities. Yes, the fact that they are no longer a player in the Caucasus whom everyone looks to.
At the same time, Putin's confidence in his pseudo-greatness is only growing. According to Western media, Putin is convinced that his army will break through the Ukrainian defenses in the coming months.
We will achieve this. That's how it will be.
He sees weakness, he sees political impotence, he sees that at the moment politicians on the old continent are unable to respond to the threats that exist. And based on this ostrich-like position, Putin really does sense it. He, more than anyone else, knows how to take advantage of such things given his KGB background.
Naturally, President Trump of the United States is dissatisfied with Putin's ambitions, and it seems is beginning to shift the country's policy toward Ukraine. He has already promised to send another Patriot system.
Many systems have already been sent to Ukraine, but they asked for more, and we will consider this request. This is a very expensive system, and I regret that we have to spend so much on a war that should never have started. They are doing this because they want to prevent deaths. They are being hit very hard. We will consider the issue of transferring it.
As we have already learned from the experience of his second presidential term, these statements very rarely turn into concrete actions. Therefore, trying to analyze every sneeze and every sigh of Trump in relation to Putin at this point is a rather futile strategy.
In addition, the American president stated that he has not suspended arms deliveries to Ukraine.
I haven't thought about that, because right now we are considering sending ammunition to Ukraine, but I haven't looked into it in depth. If that decision had really been made, I would know. I would be the first to find out about it. I would have to give the order for that, but I haven't done that yet.
Against the backdrop of such statements from Trump, European leaders have put an end to any diplomacy with Russia, and the German Chancellor has stated that they are about to move on to more radical actions.
The means and resources of diplomacy to end the war have been exhausted. The criminal regime is openly questioning the right of an entire country to exist, using military force, and is seeking to destroy the freedom of the entire European continent. The federal government under my leadership will do everything to prevent this from happening.
And to the same MERS, first and foremost, the question, what is the situation with the Taurus missiles that were promised during the election campaign, but which he has, been dodging delivering for quite a significant period of time now, while serving as chancellor. Given his aggressive rhetoric towards Russia, this decision should have been made in the very first days of his term.
It seems that Russia, and Putin in particular, is increasingly losing influence not only in Europe but also among its partners in Asia. However, judging by all appearances, the dictator's bloodthirsty ambitions are only growing stronger because of this.
Russian occupation forces intend to resume active assault operations in southern Ukraine. To this end, they are regrouping their forces and resources in the Zaporizhia region.
The enemy is currently carrying out certain regroupings of forces and resources, bringing assault group personnel to the front lines and providing engineering support for these assaults, for example, by clearing mines from the routes of advance. In addition, they are bringing up their reserves and logistics, preparing to resume active assault operations in two directions in the Zaporizhia region, Orikhiv and Huliaipol. Also, over the past few days, the number of enemy airstrikes against us has increased. The enemy has begun to operate very actively on the right bank in the Kherson direction, launching strikes with unguided aerial rockets on several settlements. Vladislav Voloshin, spokesperson for the defense forces of southern Ukraine, speaking live on the United News Marathon.
Those enemy attacks are not yielding any results. Nevertheless, as you can see, there has been an increase in activity. Of course, the situation is quite difficult in the Zaporizhia direction, but indeed regrouping and rotation of personnel are taking place. The enemy is indeed trying to move its assault groups closer to the line of combat engagement. Their numbers have not changed, 3 to 4 people. They are trying to move forward. Next, there is an attempt to build up forces. Accordingly, if there is a build-up, then activity also increases. This includes both tube artillery for support and aviation as well.
Meanwhile, in the Lyman direction, the enemy launched assaults in the areas of Novokhorivka, Karpivka, Ritkodub, Zelena Dolina, Kolodezi and Rykhorivka. On the Kramatorsk section of the front, Ukrainian defenders repelled Russian attacks near Chasiv Yar, Pretekine and Bilahora. And in the Pokrovsk direction, Russian forces tried to push back the defense forces' positions near Mirne, Mirolyubivka, Novosergivka, Muravka, Orikova and Alexeyevka.
The enemy has broken through, or is trying to break through, more specifically into the bridgeheads near Pokrovsk and Kostiantynivka, in order to split them into 2 separate bridgeheads, and firstly to outflank Pokrovsk. This will already be the third attempt at creating flanking strikes against Pokrovsk, and accordingly trying to advance in the direction of Kostiantynivka. They are trying to come in specifically through the Dnipropetrovsk region in order to reach the flanks of Pokrovsk, so they can try to attack the city not head-on, since that hasn't yielded results, but rather to envelop it, so to speak, with 3 pincers, and accordingly try to enter Pokrovsk. It is clear that for the enemy, the Novopavlivka and southern Donetsk directions are no less important today than Pokrovsk itself and Kostiantynivka.
On the border of the Zaporizhia and Donetsk regions, Operators from the 2nd Battalion of the 14th of September Arate Regiment of Unmanned Systems Forces struck an anti-aircraft missile system belonging to the Russian occupation troops. A direct hit on the system caused the missiles to detonate and completely destroyed it. The operation was carried out together with the aerial reconnaissance of the 74th Separate Reconnaissance Battalion. Footage of the combat work of the soldiers from the 81st Separate Air Mobile Slobozhanska Brigade was shown by the press service of the Ukrainian Air Assault Forces. In one of the eastern directions, the defenders spotted several enemy positions and destroyed them with precise strikes.
Drone alliance against the whole world? Chinese UAVs in the heart of Russia. Contracts are pouring in. Putin's bloody factories are running at full capacity. 10,000 drones a month is not the limit. Where is the truth? Relocation to China, no, that's a twist. She has outsmarted everyone. Trump has some aces up his sleeve. The US and Europe are entering the game with renewed strength. China and Russia could be left out in the cold. Shocking details coming up next.
The Russian press reports that a factory was built in Khabarovsk with the help of Chinese partners, and it is becoming one of the main suppliers of drones for Russian army operations.
The Aerohit company's factory, which receives government funding, plans to ramp up drone production to 10,000 units per month this year and expand manufacturing with more advanced models. And even though the Chinese authorities claim that, despite their unlimited partnership with Russia, China does not supply Russia with military technologies that could be used in aggression against Ukraine, the Kremlin continues to insist otherwise. They say that without China's help, it would be impossible to produce so many UAVs for the needs of the front.
The problem is truly everywhere. This includes batteries, engines, and even video data transmission systems.
All of these, the drone manufacturing company Aerohit is now ordering from China. Since 2022, the Khabarovsk-based company has been producing drones for military purposes.
And it doesn't stop there. A Bloomberg investigation based on documents obtained by the agency also points to alleged close cooperation between Beijing and Moscow. The Russian company Aerohit has been working closely with the Chinese since the beginning of 2023. Their relationship was briefly interrupted due to sanctions. The Russian UAV manufacturer was blacklisted by the US in June 2024, and in November it came under UK sanctions as well. However, according to the documents, contracts with Chinese partners were restored at the end of the same year. And since May 2025, the two sides have been negotiating the localization of production in Russia.
Documents dated from late 2022 to June 2025 show the extent to which Moscow conceals its suppliers and delivers equipment to its military, often using intermediaries operating in other sectors such as air transportation, agricultural supplies, and seafood transportation services.
However, the devil is not as black as he is painted. According to domestic military analysts, one should not take Bloomberg journalists or especially Russian propagandists at their word.
The information, to use technical terms, is exaggerated. In other words, it does not correspond to reality. There are a number of inconsistencies in this information, starting with the feasibility of producing these drones.
According to the Moscow Times, this year the Russians plan to ramp up drone production in Khabarovsk to 10,000 units per month. For reference, that's equal to the annual output of UAVs at the largest plant in Alabuga. At the same time, so far, Aerohit is only delivering a trial batch of 100 units to the army, where the other 9,900 drones claimed by the Kremlin have disappeared to remains a mystery, as does the final cost per unit. While Bloomberg cites a figure of $1,000, Russian media inflated by a factor of 8.
The Autel Evo Max 4T was originally developed for civilian use, but has proven to be highly effective in combat thanks to a number of key advantages, such as a jamming-resistant radio module. Aerohit explains. The sell price will be 650,000 rubles per unit.
All these discrepancies in the figures lead analysts to believe that the Kremlin's loud statements serve only as a smokescreen for Putin. While the whole world discusses the colossal capacity of the Khabarovsk plant, actual production farther from the reach of Ukrainian drones may in fact be moved to China.
The most dangerous situation for the Ukrainian side is when Russian entrepreneurs move a fiber optic manufacturing facility for Russian FPV drones to the territory of the People's Republic of China. This is the most dangerous scenario for the Ukrainian side. At the moment, there is information about the relocation of battery production for strike drones to the territory of the People's Republic of China. This trend is the most threatening for the Ukrainian side. That is, the direct relocation of production under the supervision of Russian specialists to the territory of the People's Republic of China itself.
This is exactly where Western and American sanctions should come into play. Chinese manufacturers fear these sanctions most of all. According to analysts, it would be enough for the White House to merely hint at cutting ties with certain companies from China for them to abandon any thoughts of relocating Russian military production to their homeland once and for all.
Urgent. No one expected this. Ukraine is not enough for Putin. British intelligence is sounding the alarm and revealing a terrible truth. The Kremlin's next target is the Balkans. A secret operation by the White Stone has already been launched, and this is just the beginning. What is the Kremlin planning? Watch the report for all the details.
A new old war. Putin may take advantage of a favorable moment and open a new theater of military operations in the Balkans. Politico cites a grim forecast from the UK Foreign Secretary. David Lemmy believes that while Europe was dealing with Ukraine, tensions in another hotspot of the European region have only been growing.
At a critical time when there is a significant and ongoing war in Europe, and we clearly see the long, pervasive arm of Russian interference throughout the entire region, you would indeed be an absolute fool to take your eyes completely off the Western Balkans, where there are still many deeply unresolved issues and lingering challenges. Putin's interests here lie in keeping the region destabilized. It is in his interest to keep the countries of the Western Balkans on edge, to have a destabilized population, and to wage cyber and hybrid warfare.
All 6 Western Balkan states, Serbia, Bosnia and Herzegovina, Montenegro, North Macedonia, Kosovo and Albania are trying to become members of the EU. At the same time, there is strong confrontation and Russian presence in the region. Serbia's leader Vučić is considered a supporter of Putin. During his years in power, he has not truly embraced democratic values or rejected corruption. There are strong anti-NATO sentiments in the country, but recently Serbia has been shaken by unprecedented student demonstrations. Formally, the protests began after part of the roof collapsed at the railway station last November. 16 people died as a result of the incident. On Wednesday, when protesters gathered to honor the memory of the victims, a car drove into the crowd. Analysts believe that Russians themselves are also playing a role in destabilizing the country. As is often the case, the Kremlin is playing both sides to keep the confrontation going.
Right now, it's the Russians who are steering things up in Serbia. I haven't shared this inside information before. This is confidential information, but I'll share it with you. They are destabilizing Serbia. Vučić doesn't fully satisfy them, they don't like everything, so they started stirring things up, you see? And next, the task is to destabilize the entire Balkans. It benefits them for blood to be shed there, for there to be destabilization. At some point, I really hope the Balkans will realize how Russia is using them.
At the same time, not without reason, Kosovo, which is not recognized by Serbia, accuses its neighbors of hybrid attacks. For example, in 2023, in the village of Banjska in northern Kosovo, unknown armed men in armored vehicles laid siege to a Serbian Orthodox monastery. During the ensuing shootout, 1 police officer and 3 of the attackers' ethnic Serbs were killed. The authorities of Kosovo accused Serbia, to which Vučić responded in kind.
Albin Kurti, the Prime Minister of Kosovo, is the only one to blame, the only one who wants conflict and war. His main desire in life is to push us into a war with NATO.
In December of last year, there was an explosion in Kosovo that damaged the energy and water systems on an important canal. This incident was equated to a terrorist attack. The authorities of Kosovo accused their neighbors of interfering in the recent general elections. To destabilize the situation, the Serbian-Russian humanitarian center is being used at the behest of the Kremlin. Its functions in the region are still unclear, but it is located in niche just 100 kilometers from a NATO base. By the way, this city was the first where a Russian party achieved electoral success. It appeared in Serbia a year after the so-called Serbian-Russian Humanitarian Center was established. Also, we should not forget about Bosnia and Herzegovina in this region. Former President Milorad Dodik has been sentenced to 1 year in prison and a 6-year ban from holding public office for violating the orders of the International Peace Envoy. He is evading punishment, traveling between Serbia and Russia.
If we go back to Yugoslav times, if someone had paid more attention to what was happening here in the 80s, I think things could have turned out very differently. I think the West realized the reality of what was happening in Yugoslavia too late. And I wonder if something very similar could happen right now. Not in the sense that the result would be the same as if you ended up with a war, but in terms of a wake-up call when the influence of Russia and China has become so deeply rooted in this country that it's too little too late.
Analysts believe that a new wave of hostilities in the Balkans could be triggered if, in the current negotiation process on the Ukrainian issue, the Russians get away with everything, and even under the protection of the United States.
That's all for now. And for more breaking news from the front, tune in to the next episode.